Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn how Uber and Mad Canada are reducing impaired driving at uber.com/home soon.
CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw, and you can tell because of the flags behind me, I am here at the legislature this week recording the show, one of the last weeks of sort of politics occurring here, the Premier doing his year-end interviews, amongst other things. That has been a big week on the reconciliation front, another major court ruling disrupting the government's agenda, the Premier ramping up his response to that, and the BC Conservatives seeing a bit of a bump 1 week after ousting leader John Rustad. We're going to bring in the pod squad to break all of that down. Jeff Ferrier and Jillian Oliver are here. Ali is off this week. Before we start here, I just want to play a quick clip of the Premier speaking at the BC Chamber of Commerce in Vancouver on Wednesday.
We have two lines in the sand. First, any reconciliation work by government, by the courts, has to respect private properties. Period. Private, fee-simple property, whether it's a family home or an industrial park owned by a business, we have to go to the wall to defend those private properties. And that is the end of the story.
All right, so that is the Premier talking about lines in the sand, his strongest language yet on reconciliation, both because of a new Court of Appeal ruling that declares the government's Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples law can be used to strike down other provincial laws, opening up the potential for a whole bunch of court challenges and laws being sent back to the legislature, and the Premier responding to that with kind of language we haven't seen him use before, Jeff. Lines in the sand, the potential for a toxic reaction to reconciliation in general. What did you think of how he responded to this court challenge?
Well, I think the government realizes that it's facing a reconciliation court crisis here. It's a clear escalation of the language on the Premier's part here. We've seen them for weeks trying to reassure the public that nothing's changed, that everything's okay, that the government's got this all handled. And here we see him talking about lines in the sand, about lawyers run amok. I'm sorry, judges run amok.
Lawyers too.
Lawyers, well, judges used to be lawyers, so we can blame them all for this. Private property rights at risk, endangered because of judicial activism, laws to be changed by judges, not legislators. And people are paying attention to this in ways that they haven't been paying attention in the past to these issues. I've had people come up to me, apolitical, asking about what does this all mean, expressing their concerns. So this is an escalation of language by the Premier in the face of a public that is really tuned in and really concerned about what this means for them.
Jillian, do you think it hit the right mark, that escalation? Was it the right tone? Did you get the sense that that was what the public wanted to hear?
I think so. I think, like Jeff said, the Premier is trying to show that this is the work of the courts and not his government at a time when the opposition is trying to put the blame onto him. I also think that it is fair to see this as a little bit of judicial overreach. The reason why we have legislators make the laws is because they're accountable to the public. It's the court's role to interpret them. And I think a lot of people were surprised by how far this ruling went. It does seem like they are going to be able to resolve it within legislation. But we also need the federal government to step up and do that too, to clarify this so that we can get back to having the legislature be accountable for what is a very big task of implementing UNDRIP in the way that it was intended.
Back when the government did, move towards implementing UNDRIP through this DRIPA law, it did say very clearly in 2019, this law should not be used by the courts to strike down other laws. And you're right, Jillian, the courts have done that anyways, and the Premier saying that's not their job. That's the job of MLAs at the legislature. But it's interesting, Jeff, there's a very clear proposition for voters, for British Columbians on this issue. The Conservatives coming out saying, just repeal DRIPA. It's having all sorts of unintended consequences. This isn't the direction we should be going. It's not working. And the government coming back with, well, no, we can amend, clause whatever of the Interpretation Act to provide more judicial discretion to the like that prospect. Do you think the government's messaging versus the conservative messaging? What do you make of that?
I think the conservative messaging is clear, direct, simple, easy to understand. And in that respect, it's a strong volley by them, with in the first week of Trevor Halford being the interim leader. I think the government position of fix it, don't nix it over the long term, I think, is probably the more responsible approach. I think British Columbians are fair-minded people. They want to see reconciliation advance. I think they're concerned, though, about the pace and broad reach of it and this lack of control. I don't think you fix that by just getting rid of the law. I think you have to go into the legislation and make it clear to the judges and courts that it means what it means, and not what they suggest that it means.
Jillian, though, it feels like maybe the public trust that the government and the premier, who was the attorney general through all of this, know what they're doing on the file, in the sense that it's how it's going to actually result in an outcome that people can kind of see. Like maybe that was waning. Do you think proposing to go back to the legislature and fix the thing that you originally put in that has gone completely sideways on you versus just getting rid of it and starting over, what are the merits of both of those pitches to people, do you think?
I mean, I think it's a really challenging thing to message. These court decisions are so long, so complicated, really, really challenging to understand. I think that we need to talk about and remember is that just getting rid of the law doesn't really resolve the problem in terms of creating more certainty, because a lot of these rights of Aboriginal title and of the duty to consult are actually constitutionally protected. And DRIP really just was intended to just implement rights that already exist. And if we get rid of it and don't move forward with that implementation, we just go back to a situation where we're litigating with First Nations after projects are already underway. And that creates a lot of uncertainty, a lot of extra costs. And what we really have only one path forward, which is to clarify how to negotiate and how to really move towards First Nations partnerships. I think the Conservatives know this. That's why we've heard Pierre Poilievre and John Rustad talk about how partnerships with First Nations are the way forward on resource projects. And I think that is revealing that the Conservatives are trying to use this as a political cudgel, while probably knowing that it's not the right way forward from a policy standpoint.
So what happens then if and we haven't seen it yet, but what happens if we do end up in a sort of toxic situation where the public polling indicates people are just fed up with this, they're worried about it, they don't want government to keep going down this path? Does the government have to then repeal DRIPA, do you think, Jeff? Is there a public pressure that would force the government to do a different approach, or is the government going to try and hold this line and explain to people why it's needed, even if they're sort of increasingly skeptical about it?
Yeah, I think the government needs to hold the line. I think when crisis strikes, opportunity can knock at the door. And in this case, here's an opportunity for the premier to come in and be seen as the person fixing it. I know that the opposition will say that they're the ones who raised it first, that there will be critics who will say they're the ones who raised it first. But at the end of the day, people will judge the government on, did they fix this problem? Did they get us to the right space? I think the danger of going and repealing DRIPA is what it would do to the relationship between First Nations, with whom BC and the private sector are trying to move forward billions and billions of dollars of major projects. And if you stop talking with them, if you stop consulting with them, if you make everything go through the courts to make a decision, none of that investment is going to happen. And we're going to find ourselves in an economic situation where we're really against the wall.
What do you think, Jillian? I'm only asking it, I guess, because sometimes the pressure on the carbon tax, on safe supply, on other government initiatives, DCRIM, has forced the NDP to abandon the nuanced position that they tried to hold for the kind of public wave of sentiment of, okay, fine, didn't work, we're gonna get rid of it, sort of thing. Is that a potential on a file, as sensitive as this, do you think?
Well, certainly, I think the Conservatives are going to keep pushing on it. They've got a leadership race coming up. I think that'll only turn up the dial from some of the candidates as they look to differentiate themselves. And then, of course, we have one BC as well on the even more inflammatory side. But I agree with Jeff. They have to see it through because I think it's a bit different from the carbon tax just because of the legal reality. If we get rid of UNDRIP, we're going to be in an even more litigious situation with First Nations at a time where the government's priority is getting these projects to fruition. I think their only path forward is to try to resolve this uncertainty with UNDRIP as quickly as possible in the legislature and putting pressure on the feds to do things on their level as well, and then try to get projects forward ahead of the next election so that they can show that they've taken action and sort of done this in a way that creates more certainty and creates more confidence that everybody wants to see.
Okay, we'll leave it there. We'll go to a break. When we come back, we're going to talk a bit about the continued buzz of an early provincial election. Kick that issue around coming up right after this.
British Columbians do not want an election. They want a government that is focused on what their needs are, and that's where we're going to stay focused. We're going to continue to do our work for British Columbians. We do not want an election, but we are ready for one.
Well, that was the Premier actually from last week saying he does not want an early election, but he is ready for one. Jeff, at the sidelines of the BC Chamber event this week, the buzz was, are we going to have an early election? Is the Premier going to look at the pressure he's under on issues like reconciliation and realize that now is the time to go when the BC Conservatives don't have a leader, when things could get more difficult and worse? This is the best last moment for the Premier to go early. I'm sure you heard the same thing. What do you think is going to happen there?
I don't think there's going to be an election call. I think British Columbians don't want it. The government doesn't want it. They have a majority that they can work with. Most of the folks I talk to are worried about can they get all their Christmas shopping done before December the 25th. I think this is politicians and political elites talking, shooting the breeze. But I think the political reality is, who wants another election so soon after the last one when there's a workable government in place and nothing but risk for the government to go to the public at a time when on a whole bunch of issues it's facing challenges, whether that's healthcare or public safety or the economy.
Mm-hmm. Wait, did you call me a political elite? Are we the political elite?
No, you were hearing it. You were hearing it,
Yeah,
Premier Shaw. I don't. For the folks on the podcast who can't see this, he's in the legislative press gallery with the blue.
Look at those flags. You can tell I'm serious because of the flags.
Yeah, the flags. So he looks like the Premier.
The political elite. That's true. Okay. What do you think, Jillian? Any possibility? Any if you're giving advice to the Premier at this point, and I'm sure lots of people are, like, does it make sense to kind of look at this window seriously?
I think I would be surprised to see him do it when the Conservatives have an interim leader. I think it would look very nakedly opportunistic and really erode any trust that voters have in the Premier to be a serious leader, which is, I think, what most people want right now. When we had our last politically opportunistic snap election, Premier Horgan did it 6 days after Sonia Furstenau became Green leader. I think soon after a new Conservative leader comes in is more likely if we get an election outside of the scheduled window. That's because that, enables the government to go to the polls at a time when the Conservatives are still kind of maybe sore from potential divisions during the race, and the new leader hasn't had a chance to really unite the party and define themselves. So I think that could be a possibility. We still don't know the timeline for that race, but I think we're probably not going to have one until that wraps up.
But how do we reconcile, back to you, Jeff, reconcile this with Eby continuing to talk about it in the form of confidence votes? I mean, he declared several bills this session matters of confidence when they didn't have to be, almost lost one of them due to an MLA who couldn't get on the vote. Why does he keep doing that? If the calculus in his office is that we shouldn't be going to an early election, what message is he trying to send with that? And is he just playing a big game of chicken by continuing to put that out on the floor with a one-seat majority he knows he has on matters that don't actually need to be confidence votes.
Well, in fairness, some of his MLAs have had some problems with their technical equipment, their computers being able to log in to do their remote voting. So maybe it's a message to them to log in a half hour before the vote and have everything working so that they can vote against an election. Look, I think actually it's he wants to project strength at a time when he has a precarious, stable, but very, very slim majority. It's a way of positioning himself as the boss. It's a way of positioning the government as being in control, that the opposition is the opposition and the government's the government. So I think that's why he does it.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Jillian? Like, one of the bills was the North Coast transmission line, and I sort of imagined a multiverse where that failed, and we're heading to an election on a transmission line that most people in Metro Vancouver couldn't find on a map that won't be done until 2034. And I just thought, I'm not sure, that can't possibly be what the New Democrats actually want, and yet they raise that as a possibility. The premier's like, I'll take that to the polls.
Well, I think first they would have been happy to go to the polls when John Rustad was still leader, and he only stepped down last week. So a lot of those votes all came before he stepped down. I agree with Jeff. I think it is sort of a way of projecting strength, and also just of putting a spotlight on the things that the premier wants to put spotlights on. Like you said, people hadn't really heard of the North Coast transmission line. Government thinks it's really, really important. They want to show that they're taking action to build and have economic stimulus. So I think it's sort of a way of turning up the heat on those issues that might otherwise kind of go unnoticed by the public.
Yeah, well, we will see. I mean, there is an actual confidence vote on the budget, which is theoretically in February, in the throne speech, although those votes can get pushed until the end of the spring. So I'm sure the rhetoric is going to ramp up, the speculation as we head into the kind of April-ish time of the year. We'll be back talking about, well, probably in the meantime too, speculation on an early election. I don't think
there's going to be if there's going to be an election, it was going to be on the Miscellaneous Statutes Amendment Act. That was the real, the transmission line's pretty electrifying, but it's going to be legislation like that really brings us to the polls.
Yes, well, I've seen weirder things happen in politics. Anyways, let's leave that topic there. We're going to take a quick break. We'll come back talking a bit about the BC Conservatives jumping back into the game after the departure of John Rustad, coming up after this. That's a photo you see there of interim BC Conservative leader Trevor Halford and federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre meeting in Ottawa after Halford had a conversation with Mr. Poilievre, was encouraged to come out, and so he hopped on a plane, went out to Ottawa, met at the House of Commons, and tried to mend relationships between the federal Conservatives and the BC Conservatives. Not technically the same party-ish, although they look identical. And anyways, apparently that relationship had hit the rocks under the end of John Rustad. At the same time, the Conservatives saying they raised more money in the week that Rustad has left, this last week, than they did in the entire month of November for a party that's broke. That is a big deal for them. Jillian, those two signs, very early, but what do you think of the strategy and the fundraising numbers there?
Yeah, well, we had heard in the run up to Rustad resigning that business leaders were threatening to withhold donations. So it kind of makes sense that there was a flood after he left as a sort of reward for doing their bidding, which is, is what it is, yeah. I guess. I think it shows that it was the right move for the party. It's time for them to turn a new page. Rustad's leadership was untenable, like we talked about for the last several months, I guess. And now it's time for them to start over. I think it's just a little injection, showing that the party is moving in another direction. We still don't know where that is. And I think leadership races can bring in lots of money. They can also be divisive. They're also really expensive. There's still so much unanswered about where this is headed. We're still in very early days.
Yeah, the rules of the race will determine in a lot of cases, who wants to come in and how expensive it's going to be to pay to play. Jeff, those two things first off, what did you think of the interim leader going to Ottawa?
I think there's two miscalculations that were made. First, can we talk about that photo? You have, for folks on the podcast and for folks on TV, you've seen this, but you have Poilievre is there standing with his legs apart like he's standing on the outer edges of a twister board, staring straight into the camera away from Rustad in this stark light that makes it look like it's a dystopian a science fiction movie. And you have Halford holding on to his hand desperately like he's trying to keep Poilievre from flying up into the air in a hot air balloon. The photo could have been better executed. I think the policy miscalculation is that in British Columbia, the free enterprise vote wins when federal liberals and federal conservatives vote together. And by going to Poilievre and having that picture taken, Halford and the conservatives are saying to the folks who voted for the 20 federal liberals versus the 19 federal conservatives, you should go vote for the NDP because we're with this sworn enemy of the people you elected to represent you in the legislature. And I think that was putting the conflict to rest was good, but it is going to be fraught with challenge.
But he couldn't have gone and met with Carney. Like his base, the Conservative Party would have just lost their minds, wouldn't they?
I'd be surprised if Carney would meet with him.
That's
yeah. And in the same way that the Liberals would lose their mind, are losing their mind right now about Halford and Poilievre getting together.
Yeah. No, I guess that's true. I mean, you do have a point there and in a lot of cases, the federal Liberals have just moved to the NDP, which is a big source of strength for the provincial NDP as well in this province. We're almost out of time here. We'll just note that there have been some names on leadership speculation. Harman Bangu, an MLA for the Conservatives, mentioning he will run if Aaron Gunn, a North Island Conservative MP, doesn't run. Gunn says he's thinking about it by Christmas. Carolyn Elliott has a website out saying, draft me into the movement. Carolyn Finlay, a former MP and cabinet minister from Surrey, saying also having a draft me website out. There's lots of people kicking the tires. I guess just 30 seconds here. That's a pretty good sign, Jillian?
Yeah, I think, it's a new party, so there's lots of opportunity to take it in lots of directions. People also have their own reasons for running. Carolyn Finlay lost her seat, so she's looking for something to do. But yeah, I think it shows that it's probably going to be a crowded field and an exciting race for them.
Jeff, 5 seconds.
Chaos.
All right, that's
what I'm hoping to see from this race. Chaos.
Okay, all right. Thanks to both of you for walking us through it this week. Thank you for watching and listening. Make sure you subscribe to the audio podcast. We're going to be on a break now for Christmas holidays, but we'll be back in January. Happy holidays to you and your loved ones, and a great new year. We will see you in 2026. Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn how Uber and Mad Canada are reducing impaired driving at uber.com/homesoon.